So next, I'm going to have our Vice President, Judy Webster, introduce our speaker.
To many of us, Stu doesn't need much introduction, but to those of you that are new to our society, Stu has been around the Peninsula Rose Society for, I don't know, 30 plus years, give or take, right, Stu? And along with that, he's also a master gardener in San Mateo and the San Francisco districts. And he's a consulting Rosarian. And he's also our past president. And now he's a YouTube celebrity. So he has many titles and achievements, and I won't take up our time listing them all, but we are thankful to have him in our membership, and we look forward to your presentation. Thank you, Stu.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen and go over to the presentation material. Sorry about that. Today I'm going to do this virtually. The photo up at the top there was a few years ago, showing the kind of thing we used to do over at the Veterans Memorial Senior Center. And the advantage of doing it this way is, of course, I can reach more people. And I'm going to have a few things to go over today. I'm going to start with a learning objectives for the talk. I've been doing this a long time, and I was doing in-person pruning for about 30 years at various garden centers and things, including the one that you heard about earlier a few years ago at Summer Winds. Right now is a good time to prune roses. They're about as slow growing, almost dormant, as they ever get. In our area, they don't fully get dormant. And if you can, I don't know if you can see my face here, but actually I see Pam McGraw's, not mine. But if you can see mine, you can see I have roses in front of my face. What we have right now is still a few blooms on there. The hardest thing I had to do pruning today was prune those nice blooms off. The tools and garden safety I'm going to talk about are important. I remember one time pruning with Carol Coop there, who was a nurse, and she pointed out how important it was to get treatment early if you hurt yourself. And I'll talk about that a little bit. How to prune, the types of cuts, different rose types, different amendments and planting techniques, dormant spraying, the most important one of the year, and water management, which is getting to be more important every day. Just out of curiosity, can people see me or not in the corner? Because all I can see is.
I see you.
Yes,
Steve.
we see you in the corner.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we can see you.
Okay, that's if everybody could go on mute, then you don't get interrupted by the dogs barking and things like that. And then if you put your questions in the chat, we can catch those at the end.
Step on this chair.
When you put the time frame in, it varies. I've been starting a little early because I have a lot of roses, and I may have to go a little late, but I'm about halfway done now, and I've had full green bins for quite a while. January 1 to February 15 is about the time you want to try pruning in our area on any kind of rose. You want to prune out dead, diseased, or damaged canes. You may have a few extras that were damaged today in all the wind. Prune out crossing or weak canes and suckers. But the ones you don't want to bloom much until after they bloom are once blooming roses. There are a few, like Lady Banks rose is an example, that bloom just once. They have a long bloom, but then they're done for the year. If you prune them too early, you prune off a lot of the bloom. You want to shape the plant. You want to prune large plants, leaving pencil-sized or finger-sized canes. And if the plant is getting too big, prune aggressively. If it's too small, prune lightly. And it's also a good time to plant, repot, or replace in the Bay Area. I'm going to show a video shortly, but these are examples of some of the tools. I've shown this slide before, and you can see a bunch of different pruners. The pruners that are the standard handheld pruners, a couple of them that are mine are here, plus a sharpener, some larger lopper pruners, and pruning saws. And with that, you can prune almost anything. I'm going to show it the next video, and it has a couple of tools. There's also a tool safety in the YouTube version, but this, I think, gives you some ideas of what you can do, including with hedge trimmers. Hi, I'm Stu Dalton. I'm with the Peninsula Rose Society. I'm a consulting Rosarian with the American Rose Society, and I'm a UC Master Gardener with the San Mateo, San Francisco district. I'm going to give you a rose pruning discussion aimed at the dormant season pruning. Normally in our area, the peninsula and San Francisco, that would be around the first part of January through the middle of February. I'm doing this a little early because I wanted to get this on film, but and it's a nice day today, not rainy or whatever. What I'm going to show first is safety issues. Right now, you can see I've got a long sleeve shirt, a little less likely to get stuck by a thorn, heavy pants, a hat, and what I'm going to show you now is a couple of different types of gloves. The common theme they all have is these are long gauntlet gloves to protect the upper arm. I'm going to put on some gauntlets that if you don't have these gauntlet gloves, you can use these with regular gloves. These also protect the upper arm, so I can reach into a rose and not be hurt. So I'll put those on, put on a pair of gloves. These are gauntlet gloves. These particular ones and these have goat skin in the palm, and that's because it's thorn penetrating resistant. So the other thing you want to do, just like in the kitchen with, you want to have a nice sharp knife so it causes less injury. You want to have nice sharp shears. These are bypass shears. I'm going to hold these toward the camera and show you these. One bypasses the other. And they're like scissors. These are called an anvil shear. You can sort of see the flat bottom and a sharp top. These are good for things that you want to crush, some kinds of stems you actually crush for a cut flower. These make a nice clean cut, and they're sharp. You want to make sure they're sharp, and these happen to be a Felco number 7, which has an ergonomic handle, but all of these are good shears. You take the blade, hold the sharp blade, and then pull a carbide sharpener about 4 or 5 times along it, and that makes it very sharp. It'll cut paper. For slightly larger things that need to be cut, this is a number 20 Felco. It's also a bypass shears. This is a very strong mechanical advantage shear that also extends out to get very high mechanical advantage, and will cut through very, very thick 1.5 inch canes or branches, if you will. This is a very useful tool to get on big things. To get way up on the top of some very large climbers, you can use these type of remote shears. And then finally, what I'm going to show first in this is to, somewhere, I don't have my goggles right now, but I would normally be wearing my goggles as well. What I'm going to show first, and I'll take a quick break before I do it, is one of the things I use because I have 250 roses. I need to cut them in a hurry because I need to fill up a couple of different weeks worth of green bins with the material. And I don't want to compost the rose material because it may have a disease that overwinters. But this is a great thing to help us do a lot of pruning in a hurry. I'll show that in just a minute. And when you take a look at the kinds of things you can cut, I sort of illustrated with this. I had cut out a large, very old cane on what amounts to a 30-year-old Sally Holmes rose. And you can see down at the bottom here, there's a pruning saw that was used. Then these large mechanical advantage shears going to smaller and smaller for different parts of the rose. You want the mechanical advantage to make your work easier. It's easier on your hands. Taking out the oldest growth periodically rejuvenates a rose. The oldest rose known is somewhere between 700 and 1,000 years old in Hildesheim, Hildesheim, Germany. And you can see it here. It was actually bombed out in World War II and has grown back this big since the Second World War. The way you make a pruning cut, there's a little bit of controversy about exactly how you do this. Do you need exactly the angle? But what you want to do is prune and point the growth. When I say point, you want the growth point, bud, to be pointing outwards. There's a reason for this, and it has to do with fungal disease and things like black spot and rust. When it point them away from the center, Patty said she had a video on finger pruning, and that basically is another way to keep growth from growing into the center. But when you're cutting, you want to use the sharp bypass shears, cut at something like an angle, 45 degrees. Frankly, the most important thing is to cut high enough above the bud so that it doesn't dry out. If you cut it too close, it'll dry out and die. Cut it too high, it dies back. And this is a picture of dieback. I'm going to show this short video about the way to make a cut. Would be a good example of something that's not pruned for the final cut. You can see above every leaf here and under every leaf, here, 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 there are buds, dormant buds. When I pull off the leaf, there's another bud right underneath, right here. What I'm going to be doing is cutting above that, about a 1/4 inch, with the sharp shears, like that. The bottom should be close to the bud. The bud will be pointing in the direction that new growth will happen in the spring. And so what I'm trying to do is shape the rose and make it grow outward so that it's not closed in the middle with crossing canes and lack of air circulation and light. What that does is it keeps you from getting good fungus control and insect control. Air and light helps on disease control. And next, I'm going to talk about the way you shape both large and mini roses. You just scale down, obviously, for the mini roses. Remove the dead disease, crossing, or very weak growth. Say I have weak growth that just doesn't look like it's going to do anything down at the bottom, I might cut that off. The bud union is this bulbous thing down at the bottom. Roots come out of the bottom of the bud union. Bud union is where things are grafted. Then these things that cross in the middle that are weaker, you cut those out. You leave the strongest 3 to 5 canes. I've had it where I've had a dozen canes, and some are new and some are old. If you remove the oldest periodically, they really do a good job of removing or rather having the growth go into the most productive canes. For florabundas, flor abunda, meaning lots of flowers, floral and abundance, you leave more branching structure on that and do light pruning, maybe a 1/3 reduction. For heavy pruning, if you want long stems or exhibition blooms, or just need to get the height down, you can prune down even a 2/3 reduction. I've done that on quite a few roses. I'll show an example of that here in a minute. This shows how you use a prop to shape a rose. The prop, you just cut some material like a Y and you hook it onto another thorn. And if these are too close together, you use it to spread out the canes. You'll find these in the rows the next year that are still in there. You have waste pruning material And you don't have to buy anything or use anything special. You just find something that has a little Y in it, cut the base, stick it on a thorn, and use that to prop the thing out. It's something not everybody teaches, but it can be quite useful when you want to reshape a rose. For pruning rose standards or tree roses, there are 4 pieces: the rootstock, the trunk, there are 2 budded antlers, and you prune the antlers like you would a bush to be open and airy. But there are really 2 bud unions at the top of one of these. There are actually 4 pieces. There's the rootstock, there's the trunk, and there are actually 2 growing bud unions here. I've actually seen it even at places like Home Depot where they'll sell 2 rose varieties on 1 tree rose. It's a standard is what they're really called. But anything else that's coming out of the trunk or out of the roots is a sucker. You don't want that. This video shows the final steps of pruning a tree rose. I've got the sheet in the back so you can see it. And you can tell this has been cut down quite a bit already, and some of it has been cut out, but basically I'll show you how to clean it up. Okay, now I'm going to clean up the bud union here a little bit. You can see there's old bark. There are a few stubs prior pruning that I should have taken off last year, but I didn't. I'm cleaning it up. You can actually use a wire brush on these, and you might get additional what are called basal breaks, meaning from the bud union or the base here, you get new growth out of this area. Allowing it to get more sunlight on it helps. Having things like growth promoters like alfalfa, which has a natural growth stimulant called tricontinol, and that is something that can. Sorry, just a second. Sorry. Okay. Can actually help on basic. Sorry. But you can see it's now maybe a little lopsided, but about 12 inches, maybe a little up to 18 inches off to the side. Some of the old growth removed, and it's more or less symmetrical. That's what you want when you're done with a rose that is going to be a standard tree rose. Thank you. If you prune climbers, climbers are a little different. Their main thing is you want to give them a structure. The first couple of years, you really don't need to prune much. You need to shape them. I've had some that I've had for 30 years. I've had some that I've had for 1 year. The ones that I have for 1 year, I tend to just pretty much leave the longest canes. If there's something really weak down at the bottom, I might cut it out. If there's crossing or broken or anything like that, I'll cut it out. But just take it and train it. If you have a structure, wires, a trellis, things like that, you can use to train the things along. If you're anyone that remembers the old Sunset Magazine split rail fence, they had one along the bottom and one along the top, and you can have the ones that come up from the laterals bent over for the top row. You want to point the tips down, or at least horizontal, and that encourages apial or upward growth up the top. You can leave some of the old ones a few bud eyes long, or cut it flush, which is very quick and easy. For trellises or arches, you want them to go over the top and down. You want to prune flush to the horizontal canes, or leave 3 to 5 bud eyes. This is a quick illustration of one of the climbers in my backyard. Actually, there are 2 roses here. They go over a bench and over a what's called a Sissinghurst arch, the shape of it. It's sort of pointed at the top, but you can't tell that because there's so much rose there. And these are in 2 large 15-gallon pots. They've been there 15 years. The roots are going out through the bottom. At this point, you can think of them as big raised beds. And they grow just fine that way. So here's the what I'm going to show you about pruning or training. This is a set of 2 climbing roses. These happen to be New Dawn. They're fairly old. They've been in these large pots in these locations for over 15 years. They go up and over an arch. And the idea is from ones that are on this side, you want it to go up, over, and down. And you just prune away a lot of the material that is extra, but keep the nice limber canes going up, over, and down. You want the ends to go down, and that keeps growth coming up all along, and it'll bloom all along this whole area. I'm going to talk briefly about suckers, and I use this illustration from the San Jose Rose Garden. Yeah. These things are sensitive when you touch the wrong thing. The San Jose Rose Garden had this illustration that did a great job of showing how a sucker can take over. The dark pink here is probably Dr. Huey. The very light pink is the desired rose in the rose garden. And the suckers come up and take most of the energy out, and you can actually weaken or kill the desired rose. Suckers come from growth below the rootstock and below the bud, from the rootstock and below the bud, from the bud union and in the root zone. Here's an example. You can see the bud union. The roots were starting down here. Here's a sucker coming up. Here's where it's removed, and you try and break it off down at the root zone. Here's a tree rose. There's a sucker going off here and a sucker going off here, and those had to be removed as well. Take them out completely or as close as you can. They do come back, so you really have to try and get them as far down toward the root with as much of the material as you can. When you're planting or getting amendments at this time of year, this is an example of the shelves at Lingso, one of the garden supply folks in this area. They're all organic in this case. I tend to use almost all or all organics with the possible exception of time release fertilizers. But they have a lot of different compositions. The 3 numbers here, N, P, and K, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Some things like bone meal have a lot more potassium and a little bit of nitrogen. Blood meal is all nitrogen. And some things like cottonseed meal have a little different character to them. They actually acidify the soil a little more. So there are all sorts of things. Crab meal, bat guano, there's all sorts. But if you use a good organic fertilizer, the nice thing is it's very hard to burn with most organics. Just don't use raw manures, especially not manures from fowl like chickens, because that raw can burn. And if you amend the soil, mix about 1/3 in. If you plan to replace, you might want to look at the poor performers. I give them 2 years. I often put them in 15-gallon pots, grow them for a year, see if I like them, maybe give them 2 if I'm not unsure. If I find things in the garden, and I just did this a couple of days ago, I shovel prune. I've pulled out a couple of roses so I can put in some of the ones I've been nursing along in the garden, and I've added them for this next year. Order bare root plants early for good selections. And if you order them and you can find own root plants, meaning not grafted, they take a little longer to produce, but they cannot sucker because anything that comes off the roots is the proper plant. If you want to get the needed amendments, it's good to get them now. I always use one amendment, and that's alfalfa meal, as I mentioned. It does have a growth hormone in it. And you want to try for the proper pH of the soil, and the proper pH is in the green zone here between 6 and 7. That's where the roses like to be. Patty has covered finger pruning in her video, but it's pretty easy. What you do is after you prune, I know some of the ones I used in the video several weeks ago are already starting to put out fine shoots. When they get to about 1 inch long, they're very tender. They can easily be knocked off if you walk by, but also they can be knocked off if they're growing the wrong way. And so at that point, take a gloved hand, push down, and you'll remove the ones that you don't want, especially the ones going to the center, where air and light really needs to get in for the best growth and for the least fungal disease. You'll leave the others to grow where you want it and keep the growth from the bud union. You also want to have the once bloomers pruned after. You don't need to do much. I use the hedge trimmers mostly. I don't really worry about on most of them because they tend to be disease resistant, older roses. I tend to just shape them a little bit with the hedge trimmers, and that may be it for the year. And I do it after they bloom. Again, move the dead, disease, and damaged growth. This gives an example of fungal diseases that are really typical. Earlier in the year, you get rust and it looks rusty. You can see the little spots of rust here. Later in the year, I took this a couple days ago, this photo, and superimposed it here because it's still rust, but unless you have a microscope, you can hardly see any rusty spots and the rest turn black. And then when you see black spots, usually earlier in the year when it's wet, I haven't seen much lately because it's not wet, but you get these literally black, dark blotches or spots, and they tend to be along some of the veins, especially the middle veins, but you can see some of those. And they can be almost in any yard. Those happen to be the San Jose Rose Garden where I took the picture. To manage the disease and pests, not everyone wants to spray. More and more, I don't spray, except once a year, and it's about now on a nice dry day. But you can try pruning if you don't want to spray for more air and light and increase the ground to foliage height. In other words, strip it way down at the bottom. You don't want to knock off anything that's a brand new growth from the bud union. But other than that, I just strip off about 6 to 8 inches to a foot for the bigger plants. And that keeps splashing fungal disease from getting up onto the leaves and allows more air to circulate through. The dormant spray is the most important of the year. These days, what you can spray that's legit are these things like copper spray. There are a couple different kinds. This one happens to be a copper soap. And then I add a horticultural oil that spreads and smothers the spreads the material and smothers the insects. If you do it by the label, you can use those together or use a spreader sticker, it's called. Black spots worst in wet weather, remove those infected leaves. If you spray, use less toxic sprays. These 3 are all listed for organic use. You can use these if you're a commercial organic grower. You can theoretically use those on organic vegetables and fruits and everything else. Just use them by the label, and they will keep from having these different fungus diseases and some of the overwintering insects. When you spray, always read and follow the label. Protect yourself, wash up afterwards. Spray on a day that's dry, not windy. I was thinking of spraying today and I couldn't. And it will be dry for 24 hours. Spray before the bees appear. They're not too evident when there's no foliage and no flowers. Spray oils on soap in a day that does not exceed 80 degrees to avoid spray burn. Spray the underside of leaves if there are any, as well as the tops. And spray the ground around the plant to prevent the overwintering pests. Water and mulch, and I wouldn't think I would have to worry about that, but we talked about it before we started. I've had to dial mine back as far as the percentage, but I've still got it watering right now. I had to turn it back on because we stopped having rain. Hopefully we'll have some this weekend. Apply mulch to reduce the water transpiration and evaporation, and a 3 to 5 inch deep around the bed with a clear space about 6 inch from the crown reduces the water use in weeds. If you add a balanced fertilizer, organic fertilizer, compost, and compost under the mulch, work it into the soil, put the mulch back in the drip zone. And that's about it. I do have some material at the end, an acknowledgement for our organization and for the master gardeners who helped in the research for this and helped me put things together. I've got questions. If you have questions for the master gardeners, people can get the copy of these slides, not with the video because it's huge, afterwards. And the videos separately are available if you just search Peninsula Rose Society YouTube. You can get any of these videos, including the one I forgot to include on pruning the shrub roses.
That was what I was going to ask about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, it's available, and I've got a list at the end here. If you need more information, now we have the YouTube videos on the Peninsula Rose Society channel, and it has one on the shrub roses. You can also go on the Peninsula Rose Society, as Patty showed at the beginning. The YouTube direct links are here for the pruning videos, plus one that was requested, and it turns out it's been the most viewed. I think we've had 60 or so views so far of the repotting video, and quite a few on many of the others. But some of these things that I included snippets from in the video, and for some reason I managed to forget to include this one, the pruning shrub roses. You can see that later. So these are references that I used, and there's some scientific research that's done on a lot of topics. At this point, I'll go off of share, and we can have questions. Patty, do you want to read the ones we got in the chat? Or I can try.
Stu,
Yes, go ahead, Pam.
so it's supposed to start raining on Sunday for a week, and I just got through putting Dormant spray and copper spray on my roses. Will I have to redo it after it rains or not?
No. The effectiveness on the oil is to basically smother the roses, smother the insects. They have book lungs, and they can't breathe.
Okay.
So that kills a lot of things. It's good for scale and other things as well, but mainly for any overwintering insects. You spray the top surface of the soil. That'll get anything that's right there and include some of the spores. And the copper is effective within a day or so.
Okay, good.
Let's see, I'm
Do
looking
we
for.
have any other questions? I don't see anyone using the chat, but perhaps they
I
feel
have
more
one.
comfortable just
I
asking.
have a question.
I have one. Oh, Stu, this is Jerry. So I've got a Just Joey hybrid tea rose that's got about 10 buds that's starting to kind of bloom out. Should I just enjoy that now, or should I sacrifice them and do my dormant pruning?
The hardest thing I had to do today was cut these beautiful roses off. They were the last ones blooming in my garden. Heck, if I had some nice Just Joeys in my garden, I'd probably at least get them for another week. But if it's raining and it's going to rain, if you go a week past February, I mean, it's not the end of the world. I'd enjoy them. That's what I'd do.
Okay.
But otherwise, put them in a vase. Something up here, and it's there's something you can do called pruning to the knob. The knob is it's not the bud union. It's somewhere up there. There's a whole bunch of growth. There may be several of them, and they could be old down at the bottom. If periodically you take out one, and maybe you have 3 or 4 more, and then you do that every year, eventually you'll get some more growth from the bottom, and you can get some new strong canes. People, a lot of times, the gardeners that don't know, prune back to the same knob every year. They prune it and they prune it and they prune it, and it grows, but it weakens over time. People of the oldest ones all the way down to the real bud union, or down to base, it rejuvenates the rose. If you think back, there was that one that I illustrated that had the very old rose that was laying on the ground and I had a pruning saw and things. That was about probably 25 to 30 years old. It was on a very old rose. And I left a lot of the other ones and I took off some of these on some of my oldest roses. So I do it too. I take off some of the old growth and I take off some of the knobs.
And
One thing that I do is I was sort of showing it on the one where you can get to it up high, a tree rose. You know, there are little stubs and scaly bark and things. And you can actually take a wire brush before it starts to break any new growth out of the bud union. You can take a wire brush to it. You can scrape it a little bit, rough it up with gently with a screwdriver and knock off some of the scaly bark. Apparently sunlight on the bud union can help break dormancy. And you can get some additional bud union growth out there with new growth, new canes. And you can also add alfalfa, which has the tricontinol, which helps encourage that. There used to be concerns where there was magnesium deficiency that adding Epsom salts would cause basal breaks. I did it for years, but analysis in our area tends to be there's plenty of magnesium. So I don't do that much anymore, but I have a lot of Epsom salts. It's cheap. You can throw out a little bit. It probably doesn't hurt to do a little bit of that occasionally.
this is yours. This is Gemini.
It's
Yeah,
yep.
it's pretty.
Back one of those. I didn't have luck with it before.
Thank you, Anastasia. I have some questions that came in through the chat. The first question is, what is the name of the rose that you showed that you just cut off today? They're so beautiful.
Yeah, I'm sorry. This is a David Austin rose. It's fairly new, 2 or 3 years old, I think, called Bathsheba. It's you can see on the bloom, it's sort of quartered. When you see that sort of a cross there in front, that's sort of what they call quartering. It's a fairly flat bloom, meaning it's not high pointed center. In a nice warm day, it has a little bit of a fragrance too. A lot of David Austins do. It's pretty bulletproof there. I didn't see any rust or black spot on it. I hadn't done anything to it for months as far as spraying or anything.
Thank you. Next question. What is the next thing you do after you prune?
Clean up. The important thing is if there's a leaf sitting on the surface and the leaf has rust or anything on it, and say you didn't clean up perfectly and you sprayed on top of it, you haven't gotten the spores underneath. So you want to clean up, get all the litter out of there, then spray. And then you can wait for the good news and have it get to the pruning or the pruning stage.
Thank you. Next question. Should you put Elmer's glue to seal the cuts? They used to say that. Are they still doing that?
I used to teach that. I used to do that. In some areas of the country, like Oregon, they have a borer that'll actually kill a rose. We have borers too. You see little holes in the end sometimes, and that's one of the reasons I used to do the Elmer's glue. However, we don't get the same kind of borers they have in the Northwest. And Jolene Adams, our consulting Rosarian chair, said, you really don't need to do that. It's sort of outdated. And I gave up my Elmer's glue days. But frankly, you get a huge cut, like a 1.5 inch cut, I probably would still put some on. Doesn't hurt.
Well, thank you for that. Do you prune floribundas as hard as you would a hybrid tea?
No. Leave more branching structure. If you want long stems, you prune a little more heavily. But on floribundas, you really don't. You leave more branching and much finer structure in the branching.
And what is your guideline when you shovel prune? Like, why do you, besides you don't like it anymore as per performer, is there another reason?
You just said them. I don't like it anymore. It's a poor performer.
Okay.
I had one that actually very highly rated rose. I had too many of them. And escapade. I just pulled one out the other day because I wanted to put a new one in. I just needed room. So it wasn't a bad rose. In fact, if anyone wants a big, old, stumpy looking escapade that'll get huge, I probably have one. I just put it in a big pot.
Next question we have. Should we actually twist the suckers off, or is it better to cut them off?
I actually like, if I can get down to the root itself, you dig away some of the dirt and you get down there and you work it back and forth, and you can take off a little bit of the parent material with it, working it back and forth. That's probably the best, but it's really hard to do. And so I often just try and get down there right next to the root with the shears and cut it off. They do come back if you don't get it all.
Right.
Some sucker worse than others. I've got a couple of hot cocoa. For some reason, I don't think it's a different rootstock, but they sucker every time.
It's good to know. That's all I have in the chat box. Does anyone like to ask any other questions? Those were great questions. That was wonderful.
Actually, I have a
Oh, I
question.
think we have one. I think we have one more.
Do you like
Similar, I just leave more branching structure and maybe a little bit smaller canes and laterals to allow, like, instead of having one or two main canes and not much branching, I'll have maybe some branching on the end of a cane. Think of this as much smaller now. That's about the only big difference. And flower abundance, yeah.
And
Acme, I mean, that's a good example of Sally Holmes. That's just a couple of years old too. And I use the hedge trimmer mostly on that and just cut out anything that's really bad.
thanks.
Stuart, on your graph, on the bullets that you had there for removing different branches or different canes, you said something about if it's a weak in a red growth. Do you take off all red growth?
No, I don't think I said, I didn't mean to say red growth.
But was in the parenthesis.
Oh,
Red was only because that was my drawing, had red on it. Think of red as, I take off crossing or damaged canes. Red was just because that's my bad artwork.
thank you. It's good to clarify these things. Yes, Jackie. Can you unmute yourself, please? Jackie, can you unmute yourself?
Can you sharpen hedge trimmers?
I just tried that for the first time. There are some with wavy edges, really hard to sharpen, and frankly, I don't know how to do those. The power hedge trimmers, I just literally individually, one at a time, went through and just scraped a couple times with that same carbide at the angle of the edge.
Okay, thank you.
Mainly what you do is you oil them periodically and to keep them so they move pretty well.
Okay, thanks.
Wonderful. Any more questions?
There's what do they call them? Long reach pruners, I think, on Amazon. They have several different versions up to about, can't remember the longest. They're pretty darn long, 10 feet maybe. Mine were about 6 feet. But if you think about it, I can reach up pretty high, and then another 6 feet, I can get to most of the climbers. And the nice thing about they're called reach and hold or cut and hold. And so depending on whether you turn it one way or the other, you can hold the piece. So, oh, there's a nice bloom. I'll pick it and I can bring it down for me. Or I can pick it and throw it over my shoulder into the scrap pile. Either way. Amazon has them, many good nurseries have them.
What was that called, Stu?
Cut and hold is the technique, but long reach pruners. If I recall right, if you look up long reach pruners on Amazon or Home Depot or your local nursery, you might be able to find them.
Okay, thanks.
And if you can't, send me an email, studalton@gmail.com.
Stu,
One
what do you
more
like to
question.
use to clean
Jerry.
your pruners and how often?
I'm on the not too often, and sometimes since I have so many lemons, I have 4 lemon trees and been giving them away, I can use lemon on them. I do not sterilize often, and there's been a lot of evidence that virus doesn't transmit via pruners. What I do is for my orchids, and I heat sterilize those, but I keep separate sets of pruners so I can actually use flame on them for orchids. But anything like Mr. Clean or any of those types of cleaners, typically not hypochlorite or Clorox, you can sterilize them if you want to, but then oil them, and you can steel wool them if you need. I don't prune mine, or I don't clean mine very often, and they seem to work fine. I don't get much disease.
Good. I have one question that came in through the chat.
I have one other comment though on
Sure.
contamination, which is if you think about it, okay, I've been working in a bush that's got a lot of rust, and I'm cutting off things with my pruners. Which do you think probably has more rust on it? The pruners or your gloves? You can't sterilize the gloves so easily.
Okay, here we have another question. When removing old thick canes, how much above the bud union do you make the cut, or do you cut flat with the bud union?
I cut flat with the bud union. You saw some of the stubs on that one for the tree rose that I didn't quite get the whole thing last year. And this year I just cleaned it up. If it looks like it isn't needed. And the video that for some reason I managed to get rid of when I was cutting out the version that didn't have video in it to be sent out, you can see that online. It's the shrub pruning video. Just go Peninsula Rose Society, YouTube, shrub, you can find it. But back to the, I'm sorry, the question. What was the question? I'm sorry. I think I said it
I
flat.
think you did. You said flat. You cut it flat with the bud union.
I show some of that in the, I think I had a dye back that I cut, and I just cut the whole thing out, even though it wasn't dyed back to that whole area.
Right. Wonderful. Wonderful. I have another question, Jackie.
So, Stu, you showed us pictures and used the word mechanical advantage, loppers. Tell me more.
Sure. Let me show you. This is an example with the long arms extended. And this actually, you can't see it very well, but there's a mechanism in here.
Mm-hmm.
Not quite the same as a gear. It's actually but it gives you even more strength. I can cut through 1.25 inches or so with this pretty easily. When I extend the arms as far as they extend, and I open this thing way up and close it, exactly.
And you don't have to use a lot of effort.
That's right. That's right.
That's great.
You'll cut huge rose limbs. The only problem with it is it's harder to reach into the middle of a plant sometimes.
Mhm.
And the other thing you can use that just takes a little longer is the very large canes can be cut with a pruning saw. They cut on the back stroke, and because they cut on the back stroke, you're not pushing your hand in
Right.
and jamming it on the thorns.
Okay. Yeah, I got these loppers that were really big and strong, and the guy said, "Oh, these will help you." Anything? Well, I can't hold them up; they're too heavy.
Well, then this is aluminum, but they will work, but they're not real lightweight, but they do have a great advantage. The other thing that I would say, you can't see it very well in this slide. Maybe I can go back. This is a Felco number 7. You see that fat handle?
Mm-hmm.
Rotates. And
Oh,
I have a little bit of arthritis, not too bad in my hands, and I have trigger finger that I've had worked on. This helps because it rotates and it's ergonomically more correct.
Mm-hmm.
It's a expensive pruner, but then all the Felcos are expensive, but they last forever.
Okay.
Actually, one of my favorite pruners is this one, which was my wife's pruner. I think it's a number 8. And a number 2 is the one I used forever until I misplaced it. That was the big problem with that one.
Stu, how many different sizes of Falco is there on the market? I didn't realize. I thought it was just one.
Oh no, I've got 5 myself.
A
Oh,
lot of them. There's a lot. I just, yeah.
And there are variations, and some are cheaper and some are more expensive. A lot of people like the ARS pruners.
Yeah.
I haven't bought those yet, and that's not American Rose Society, it's just ARS. There are replaceable blades, non-replaceable. There are these wisp pruners, there are Corona pruners. There are a lot of pruners. What you have to have is something that stays sharp. I like the ones that are Felco because down at the very bottom, there's something called a wire notch. So when you need to cut wire, you're not ruining the pruner.
Mm.
You put it right at the base and cut it, and it has a little indentation that's meant for cutting wire. And then you sharpen them with an angle on
Huh.
Handed pruners.
thank
the
you,
world
Jerry.
is right-handed, and it's unfortunate.
Mm. That's good. Good discussion.
We'll point out there's Thursday we had a quick discussion on potting, or rather cuttings, but in the current American Rose Annual, let's see if I can get this in focus. It doesn't want it there. Well, whatever. It's my background that does this. Inside there is an article on page 108, increasing your rose collections by making softwood cuttings. And so that's another way to find out information on making cuttings.
Thank you. One more questions coming. Would you shovel prune a rose that only has one cane?
I've done it. And I can try cutting it back a little bit. I can try seeing if it'll eventually grow more. But heck, I've got too many roses I want to plant that I don't have room for right now. I think I've got about 250 now. Plus, I've got 200 cuttings started. So I'll have some cuttings for sale and for donations later in the year. Mostly old roses, but some others that are before 2000 that are good roses.
Okay, have you ever heard of this term, soilless soil? Soilless soil. Have you heard of that? And who sells it?
Sounds like hydroponics.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. Has anybody here heard of anything like that?
You can grow in perlite if you just feed it nutrients, and that's really soilless. I don't know what soilless soil is, though.
Maybe Lydia can tell me, where did you get that term from? Where did you hear that? Lydia, unmute yourself, please. Can you say something? Looks like she's having trouble with sound. She's unmuted, but she's having to do that. So while she's doing that, I have another question here. Is there a pruning expert that I can hire? Someone with real expertise. I live near Menlo Park.
No.
Oh, it's unmuted. Okay. Oh, sorry. Something's happening.
Here.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm an example of somebody that lives in Menlo Park, and I would normally love to help, but I've been pretty tied up on talks. I've got one for the East Bay Rose Society tomorrow, and trying to get through my own roses before it starts raining. But I can certainly call and talk. I can't make an arrangement.
Okay. Thank you. Lydia has shared with us in the chat the link to where she first heard about this soilless, and I can share that with you. And here we are. Let me share the screen. And here we are. What is soilless mix? It's gardening with soilless mix pot. Does not include the use of soil. Instead, plants are grown in a variety of organic and inorganic materials. Using these materials rather than soil allows gardeners to grow healthy plants without the threat of soil-borne diseases. Plants grown soilless mixes are also less likely to be bothered by pests. And that's is what Stuart suggested: peat moss, perlite, vermiculite, and coarse sand. You can read about it some more if you just copy and paste the link that Lydia provided in the chat.
Yeah, I would add one thing, and that's core, because peat moss is a harvested crop from peat bogs, and they take a few thousand years to reproduce. They're not a renewable resource. They're actually burned for fuel and for whiskey. And core is the husk of the coconuts. Coconuts are grown all over the world, and there's lots of core. They are a real nice substitute. I've been doing all my starting of plants and potting up to the first 4-inch pot with one plant in core. They have combinations that have little additions like kelp and worm compost and things. Core itself is sterile. So it's
Do you,
last year, and I got about 80%, maybe a little more, start. This year I've been using the one that had a little bit of worm compost in it. And it gives a little more nutrients. And so far it's working. But soil is soil, and a lot of potting soil has been sterilized, heat sterilized. So it doesn't have microorganisms. Frankly, once I get up to the larger size, I add worm compost that's got lots of things in it, and you want the living soil eventually. Eventually, it needs nutrients. And to get the roots started, you don't need much. It's using a lot of the energy from the cutting itself to get the roots started to grow.
Okay, I have another question. Is there a video on cuttings and doing cuttings? I believe there is, Stu.
There is, though I just did it, a brief one, and there's also a write-up in the resources section that was done just from slides. But the video isn't public, meaning you can't search for it. But you can send it to anybody. It's in the, if you want, I can make it public. I just make a click and I can make it public.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a very professionally done one. It was just quick.
So the answer is we're working on that, making it public, but it's already been produced. Lydia just had an answer about where she got that information about soilless. And she said that I got that from the recent article called Contain Your Enthusiasm from an ARS annual magazine written by Suzanne Horn. So that's where we first heard that. Also, Jerry Georgette posted a link to telescoping or extendable pruners. Check that out on your chat. And another question came in, said we might want an aerodynamic lecture about gardening on Thursdays.
Ergonomic,
yeah.
Yeah.
Good idea.
A couple of years ago, we did have the physical therapist, and I learned a lot.
Yes.
Especially that it's better not to sit on your haunches and lean over or something to prune, but to actually lean over.
Right.
I would not have assumed that. But anyway, yeah, there are probably all sorts of things that we could learn about ergonomics.